Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Well, today we're talking about love again. And if you listened to our last week's show, then you know you're in for a treat, because I have back as my guest Dr. Ronald Frederick, who is the author of Loving Like You Mean It, Using Emotional Mindfulness to Transform Your Relationships. So, Dr. Frederick, I'll just give you a little bit of a break for a moment and to kind of recap some of last week's show. And I'll tell you, emotional mindfulness, well, here I already put my 2 cents in, which is a wonderful, wonderful concept, and it's a tall order. The idea of emotional mindfulness kind of building on emotional intelligence, mindfulness in general. I know my feelings, I feel them in my body, I stay with them, I name them, I claim them. I can understand their origins, and you have a term for that. Hold on one second. The signposts that I know when I am triggered. Triggers are signposts that here's what I can understand about the layers of myself, and now let me communicate my feelings to you constructively. And this, of course, is without blaming and shaming. And I can be self-aware, and from this self-awareness, I can communicate with you. And I think there's also some more good news here, because if I can look at myself as a mystery in a way that can be unfolded and share as I go, and you are a mystery and you share as you go, as Joe and Harry would have said in the Joe Harry window, I share, you share, and more is revealed. Then, right, the unknown becomes known, and now it's in our reality. But yet people are so afraid of their feelings, and there's so much more I could say, but I want to hear from you.
Oh, my gosh, I'm so impressed with
goodness.
Your recap.
Oh, well.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Oh, my pleasure. So in the last show, we looked at attachment. We looked at how we are hardwired for attachment. When someone leaves you and you think you're going to die, well, there's a lot of truth in that, because in primordial times, we really did die. If we were without our tribe, we were alone in the wilderness, and we could not survive on our own. And today we have so many what's called onesies, so many single households. And it's something like 2/3 in cities and 1/3 worldwide. People live alone, and it's how, we're not wired to live alone. And we're wired for connection. And I actually know any number of people who have given up on people, and they love their pets. And the way Americans treat their pets, I'm all for animals, but the putting them in carriages and the clothing and it really, I find it very irritating, and it's a pet peeve, so to speak. So it's really, I can't trust people, right? People are untrustworthy. And that can be many, many people's experience. They have been rejected, they have been betrayed, disapproved of, let down, etc., etc. So where do we go from here, Dr. Frederick?
Well, I want to pick up on something that we were talking about last time. one of the things that I talk about in my book, Loving Like You Mean It, because I'm really writing and speaking to all of us as individuals in relationship or wanting relationship or struggling with relationship. There are many books that have been written for couples to help the couple navigate things, and which is really important. But one of the things that I encounter, both in my personal life, in my own relationships, and in my work with people and my work with couples, is that who we bring to our relationships has a huge impact on how things will go. And, what we were talking about and what we understand is that we're so shaped by our early experiences in life. And all this information is the lessons that we learn about our feelings and about who we are and about others and whether others are trustworthy and whether they will be there for us. All of that's learned really, really early on. If we had caregivers who were reliably there for us, we learn a fundamental lesson that we can expect that our loved ones and the people that we open our hearts to are going to be there. So we have this experience where early on in life, that information that we learn, it all gets downloaded for us into our software, and we walk forward into the world of adult relationships with that, and it colors how we experience the world. So and it affects our nervous system, right? So like when we have feelings come up or things that happen in our lives that are reminiscent in some way of early experiences that we have, our nervous system gets put on high alert and we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. Now, all that's going on inside of us, based on what's happening in our lives, but also based on what happened early on in our lives. And that affects our experience in the moment. Part of our work is to be able to begin to disentangle ourselves and our nervous system from this early wiring so that we can be more fully present in the here and now and see the here and now in a more objective way. So what we're talking about is learning really how to attend to our emotional selves, be stewards of our emotional selves. When we're doing that work and working with our partner, then we're really maximizing the success of our relationship. So trust really, is something that happens, gets built between two people. And people the other may do things that are hurtful or not show up for us in certain ways. But how are we dealing with that? How are we managing that? How are we managing the feelings that come up? Are we sharing with another person how we were disappointed or we were hurt by what happened? Or are we acting out? Are we getting angry? Are we pulling away and shutting down and then ending up isolated? And so much of that has to do with how we learn to cope with our feelings early on in life. So the main point that I want to say in response to, what you're saying about trust is that one piece of that has to do with how we navigate our own emotional experience and what we do with that. And hopefully, in a relationship that's worthwhile, we're able to navigate these difficult moments and get to a place that feels better and actually builds trust between the two of us.
So what if the person, as a child, let's look at the classic, children should be seen and not heard, and there are many people who were raised that way still. And so they have such a hard time speaking up. They have a sense of not deserving their own individual expression, that they don't think that they're worth their own right to expression.
Right.
That kind of thing. And these are introjects that are like a cake. They are so baked in. And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we do about that, I think, is your question?
Yeah, it sure is. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we don't have that much time.
I know.
I'll try and share some thoughts about that. Okay, so in Loving Like You Mean It, and we talked about this last time, I share a 4-step process that is all about developing emotional mindfulness in the context of our relationships. And it starts off with recognizing when we've been triggered, so recognizing a name. So when these old feelings, when this stuff from the past gets activated in the here and now. And then we do the work, which is step 2, to stop, drop, and stay, is to go inside and work with our emotional experience. And in that step, part of what's happening is listening to what's getting activated for us, and then being present to that and getting a sense of where that comes from. So part of what you're talking about is, these lessons that get baked in, as you put it, or the sense of feeling worthless, or I don't deserve to have these feelings, or to be able to communicate these feelings, or it's not okay. We can stay with that experience and trace it back in time. I'm not talking about an intellectual exercise where you're sitting down with, a piece of paper and a pen trying to figure this out. I'm talking about going inside and listening to what's there, because if we do that, our emotional brain's opening up and it's giving us information, and oftentimes we find the little one inside of us, or the part of us inside that has these feelings, who feels ashamed, who feels worthless. And then we need to attend to that and help ourselves to be able to calm those parts of us so that we can come back into the here and now from an adult place. So, when you say, what do we do about those things, that's about an inner healing that needs to happen. It doesn't mean you have to do it all yourself, but what we're trying to do is to be able to uncouple ourselves a bit from these echoes from the past so that we can work with it. Right, yes. And that we can navigate it in a better way in our relationships, instead of, the angry part of us leading the way, when actually what's really going on inside of us is this fear, you don't love me, or I'm worthless.
Yes. So
I want to add just one piece, Dr. Duffy, because we were talking about it last time, and you were asking about how do we be compassionate with ourselves when, we're hearing some of the stuff inside of us. And one of the exercises that I have in the book is I ask people to imagine saying some of the stuff that they say to themselves, or that they hear in their head, to a child. Now, people will tell themselves, I don't deserve, I shouldn't need anyone. I should do it myself. This is what you were saying last time.
Yes.
I shouldn't have these needs. Well, picture yourself saying that to a 4-year-old. Because that's basically what you're kind of doing.
Right.
And you're repeating, as you call them, these introjects, you're repeating, this sort of dialogue and these lessons that you ingested as a child. So it's very stark when you imagine a 3-year-old and saying, stop crying, get over it.
Or you're worthless, or you don't deserve your own good.
And I ask my clients and myself, is that what the child needs to feel better?
Right.
And I think we know instinctively that that's not the case. It's not going to help. So why should it help us?
Right. So I am a very firm proponent of self-parenting. And And I think that's the way. That's the way out, or that's the way in, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah, and eventually that emotional brain, that those younger, unprocessed or underprocessed parts of us will know that there's a wise, mature person who is in their corner, that they don't have to be alone, frozen in the dark any longer.
Exactly. You know, what we're talking about here is something that I talk about in Loving Like You Mean It. It comes from mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. And that is the idea of participatory observation. Mm-hmm. So to sort of break that down, you know, if we're talking about our emotional experience, we could be a participant, which means we have a flash of anger or we get triggered and it envelops us. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, we're fully immersed in the experience. And if we're not mindful in a way, we may be controlled by that experience. Now, the observational piece, it has to do with when we're able to step aside, not literally, figuratively, and observe what's happening for us. So that's something along the lines of, say, you're laughing, and a part of your brain says, wow, I am really laughing really hard. Mm-hmm. That's your observer. And that's a different part of your brain. So there's the limbic system, or the emotional part of our brain. That's what gets activated. That's the participant. And then there's our prefrontal cortex. When that comes online, that's when we bring our observer online. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is to have a balance. Mm-hmm. And when we have an experience, that we can participate in it and also observe that experience as well.
Yes.
And it's there where we're going to find the freedom to be able to move in a different direction.
Right. So very, very well said. Very, very true. And participant observation, or participatory observation,
exactly,
is the name of the game. And to take, as you say, that step back or step to the side and look at yourself and witness yourself, be a witness or an observer to self, the prefrontal lobe, the reasonable brain. Yes, absolutely.
So what you're talking about in terms of these parts, you know, and dealing with the parts inside of us, that's really what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We're stepping back and getting some distance and being able to look at and get curious about what's happening inside of us. When we do that, we're stretching the space between stimulus and response, so we have more room to be able to do other things.
Wow, well put. Stretching.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to be assessing you like that. I'm always looking for new ways to explain to my students, my clients, my audiences, stretch the space between stimulus and response. Yes, absolutely. And, oh my God, Steve Covey would call it push your internal pause button.
Exactly.
There are just so many.
Right. All these different ways of talking about it. And ultimately one of them rings true and clicks for us, hopefully.
Right. Whichever one, works. But I love that, stretching the space. So, just stopping and giving pause, and the new brain takes a while to catch up to the old brain, because the old brain is our permanent alarm system that goes on the, as you said, fight, flee, or freeze, and that's always in the business of having radar to look at any threats in the environment. Right. And these days, it's not it's not the saber-toothed tiger per se. It can be your boss's crooked eyebrow.
Right.
Right. It's a psychological threat rather than necessarily a physical threat, even though we know there's still a hell of a lot of violence in the world. But there's so much psychological threat, mostly of feeling unwanted, unloved.
Right.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, we have this brain which is still primitive in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so it's really learning how to work with that brain that can react in a very strong way when it's really not called for.
Right. It's not really called for. Like, the punishment does not fit the crime.
Exactly.
When someone has like a huge reaction to a seemingly small thing, well, you know you've been triggered, and you just follow that signpost, and you say, okay, what does this mean to me? And just follow the trail. Yes.
And that's when you're growing this capacity, and that's when you're growing the capacities in your brain. Mindful capacities that help you to navigate and not get caught up in the experience.
Yeah, and I know I asked you in the last show, but I am going to make mention of it again, the shadow, which I think is a great obstacle to many people of self-awareness, of exploration.
Right, we have to bring everything out of the shadow. So the feelings that we've learned to avoid, the needs that we think are wrong, or the negative feelings that we may have about ourselves. When we do that, when we bring it into the light and we can look at it and we can see, what's going on underneath us, first of all, it lowers all the shame or the anxiety that, we may have around our inner experience. And we're then put in a place where we can manage it differently. But when it's left in the shadows, then it has power over us.
Right. And what do you think about that term? I know I'm throwing something at you. The finding gold in the shadow?
Of course.
Yes.
Because there's so much inherent in our experience. And what if you find, the part of yourself or the unprocessed memory or unresolved experience that when we can work through it brings us to a better place? Mm-hmm. That's gold.
Yes, that is the gold. And to really get the richness of our experience. And what was it? And there was a time that I didn't let people know that I waited on tables all through undergraduate and graduate school. And I remember once when I had gotten a position as an adjunct professor at a local college while I was still completing my master's, and one of my students walked into the restaurant, and I almost died from shame.
Oh.
Yeah, I was so ashamed, and I never said a word to her in class, nor she to me. And that would have been a very, very wonderful lesson.
Right. But listen to the compassion in your voice now as you look back on your younger self.
Yes, exactly.
If only we could have that in those moments, right?
Right, in those moments.
And we can. It takes work, though.
Right. And I know at the time I didn't want my students to know that I was an adjunct and not a full-timer because I didn't want to lose power in their eyes. And I was a very young professor, and I was insecure. So I could have said, I'm still working my way through getting my master's, and this is this work enables me to pay my own rent, and I'm very proud of that, and all of that. So it was not a learning lesson at the time, but it is now.
And one that you're willing to share, and I find the more that we're able to share those sorts of things, our own humanity, our own vulnerability, everyone can relate.
Yes.
And it makes it okay. We're all vulnerable. We all have these experiences.
Right, our own humanity, and how it buoys people up when other people share such things and gives them permission to be real. You talk about, becoming real, like the Velveteen Rabbit.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I continue to share, and I share with my clients, and I share in my book, Loving Like You Mean It, my own struggles, because I think this is just about being human. And
yes.
The more we can accept that, that we have a primitive brain, that we're shaped by our early experience, that it can cause us to be triggered, and we come to appreciate it as this is just part of my experience, we can relate to it in a different way, in a way that's healthier, and we don't have to suffer because of it as much.
Right, and that's what I love about Zen Buddhism, about, we can have pain, but we don't have to suffer so much. Or, as the Buddha said, instead of looking at having obstacles in our path, we can say the obstacles are the path.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
So, Dr. Frederick, loving like you mean it, using emotional mindfulness to transform your relationships. We only have a minute or so left. And is there anything that you want people to know before we close?
That very thing, which I was just saying, is that this is all a part of our experience. I invite you to read my book and to learn more about, we're operating in many ways in the world without an emotional manual. And, how often have you tried to do something without looking at the manual? Would you drive a car without really understanding how, what you need to do in order to be able to make it operate in a basic way? Well, in many ways, that's what we're doing in relationship and with our emotions. And we can learn those things, and we can come to understand ourselves better and be attuned to ourselves and learn how to drive sail our ship, so to speak, or drive our emotional car. And all of that can shift, and we can update our brain to support us to have the kind of relationships that we want to have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Ronald Frederick. Loving like you mean it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. And
Same here.
and wishing all of you great relationships.